get started. We have a couple people who aren't here yet, but we have a packed agenda. My name is Kate O'Connor, and I'm the chair of the panel. And first, I'm just going to do a quick review of the agenda. And as everybody will see, it's a packed one, so we're going to try to keep moving as quickly as we can so we don't get too far behind. We have two new, or three, 2.5. A couple new members of the panel, and I emailed you, but what we're going to do is when they get to them, when they go around, they're going to give a Reader's Digest version of, who they are, where they're from, so that everybody can get to know them. So, Chris, do you want to start with the introduction?
Absolutely. Good evening, everybody. I'm Chris Williams. I'm the Vice President at Entergy's Vermont Yankee site.
I'm Paul Paradise. I'm the Decommissioning Director at Vermont Yankee. I'm one of the new members to the panel. And I've been at Vermont Yankee since 2000. I have been a Brattleboro resident since then. So excited to be on the panel and take part in communications.
I'm Steve Skibniowski. I'm the representative from the town of Vernon, appointed by the Vernon Select Board to this committee.
I'm David Andrews from the National Brotherhood of Electrical Workers. I represent the current and former employees of Vermont Yankee. Bill Irwin, I represent the Agency of Human Services. I work for the Department of Health, Radiological and Toxicological Sciences Program Chief. Good evening. My name is Trey Martin. I'm the Deputy Secretary at the Agency of Natural Resources. I'm one of the new members as well. I am not only new to this panel, but relatively new to my post as Deputy Secretary. Been in this job since about January. Before that, I was an attorney at the Department of Environmental Conservation, working with Commissioner Beers, who's spot.
I am George Desch. I'm Deputy Commissioner of the Department of Environmental Conservation. I've actually been in the department for a month since Commissioner Mears left. I was asked by the new commissioner, Alyssa Shuren, to fill in for her, take her place. But I spent 35 years in the department in waste management. I've been involved with Vermont Yankee since decommissioning started. So.
I'm Martin Langfeld, a citizen member of the panel appointed by the governor.
Hi, I'm Pat Moulton. I'm the Secretary of the Agency of Commerce and Community Development.
I'm Chris Kamen, Executive Director, Wyndham Regional Commission, and representing Wyndham Regional Commission.
And I'm Jim Tonkovich, citizen appointee by Senator Campbell.
Derek Jordan, a citizen appointee by Shasta.
Paul Mark, Massachusetts State Representative.
Thank you, everybody. Now we need to review and approve the minutes of June. I'm sure everybody's read them. Oh, yeah. Hey, Tony, did anyone end up calling in?
Yes, David Dean is on the line, and it looks like Diane Becker is on the line as well. Just let me check 1 second here. Oh, and Jim Matteau is on remotely. I don't know if you will be able to hear them.
Okay.
I'm having some issues over here.
Great. And if the people on the phone can hear us, if you want to say something, yell real loud.
Kate, I would make a motion to accept the minutes as drafted.
Is there a second?
I second that.
Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed or abstaining? Okay, now the next item on the agenda, the description and model of the high storm dry cask. I put this on the agenda because after the presentation by Dr. Singh at our last meeting, there seemed to be just a little bit of confusion on really what the cask is, and the term overpack seemed to confuse everybody. So we're going to take just a short period of time to have a demonstration with the model of what a cask is. We don't have time to take questions at this point, but what we're going to do is the Entergy people have agreed that they can stay after the meeting. So if anybody has any questions and wants to touch the model and look at it, they'll do that. But so right now, we're just going to have a brief description of what that is.
Thanks, Kate. My name's Kenneth Swarner. I'm the dry fuel storage project manager for Vermont Yankee.
If you can use the mic.
Can you hear me without the mic? No. Okay. Joe, can I get you to help me? We're going to use the model and give you a brief presentation on actually how we transfer spent nuclear fuel from wet storage to dry storage. First thing we're going to do is take a look at the 4 major components in doing that. Kate talked about an overpack. An overpack is what we call a high storm. And a high storm, high means Holtec International, and storm means storage module. So if you saw pictures in the paper or if you've been to the plant, it's the green casks that are actually sitting on the pad. It's about 18 foot tall, 11 foot in diameter, and weighs somewhere between 180 and 200 ton as it sits on the pad. The next thing is what we call a high track. Again, high is Holtec International, and track is the transfer cask. So this is what we actually lower in the spent fuel pool and then transfer the fuel from it into the high storm. Number 3 is the MPC, which is a multi-purpose container, which is what the fuel actually goes in. And I don't know if you can see the basket that's inside it. Holds 68 spent fuel assemblies.
Can you pull that to the little back too?
Oh, I'm sorry. So that's a basket, holds 68 spent fuel assemblies. And the 4th thing that we want to touch on is a mating device, which allows us to transfer the MPC out. Yes. A mating device which allows us to transfer the MPC from the high track, the transfer case, into the storage module, the overpack, the high storm. And what it does is, after we've set down, it'll gives us a path there. So what we do is, first thing we would do would be load the MPC into the high track, put it into the spent fuel pool, load the 68 spent fuel assemblies, bring it out and process it. Process it means that we would drain some water out of it, weld the lid on, drain the rest of the water, dry it to the PEC-spec limits, weld it so it's a completely welded, completely stainless steel welded enclosed. Again, it's about 5.5 foot in diameter. It's about 15.5 foot tall, and it weighs about 20 tons. So after we've welded it, we set it on top of the mating device that is sitting on the high storm or the overpack. Lift the MPC off of the bottom, unbolt the bottom, which releases the bottom lid. We open the door, which allows us to transfer. Joe, can you help me? There we go. Then we'll drop the rigging down in it. We'll remove the high track, remove the mating device, put the lid on the high storm, which is again what we call the overpack, and transfer it to the asphyxie pad for storage. That's it in a nutshell. Any questions?
I'm going to ask one question, though I said we weren't allowed to. The overpack is the cask.
The overpack is the green carbon steel concrete overpack that protects the stainless steel cask that's inside.
And it's always on.
It's always on it, yes. Okay. Thank you.
Now, and anybody in the public afterwards, we can go over that again. But thank you.
Thank you.
now we're going to have, I'm assuming it's going to be Joe who does the Entergy.
All right, good evening, everyone. I'm Joe Lynch, Government Affairs Manager for Entergy Vermont Yankee. Welcome back to the NDCAP meeting. Just wanted to provide an overview of the activities that have occurred since our last meeting. As you recall, we last met in June, so there has been a little time between meetings. So I wanted to kind of review some of the activities that we've completed or are working on at the site, some of the licensing actions that we continue to pursue as part of the decommissioning process, and just really bring you up to date on where we stand with the project. So at the last meeting, I reported that we were in the process of doing what we call system or draining or layout. So these are the systems that previously were used in power production at Vermont Yankee that are no longer needed. There's about 50 of those systems. We're about, I'd say about a third of the way through. We've got 16 of those systems completely drained, and the systems are ready for layup, 5 are in progress, and a number of other ones are planned. The reason for this is that we will be removing power from a number of the buildings that no longer are required for maintenance of just the spent fuel, to reduce our energy costs and to put the plant closer towards the ultimate dormancy that will be transitioning in 2020. At the last meeting, I had also mentioned that we're going through a number of security plan changes. We had those phased, phase 1 and phase 2. We have completed those modifications, and the site is now better positioned from a security perspective now that we've transitioned from operation to decommissioning. As part of our commitment to the emergency plan, our next emergency plan drill is scheduled for October 21st. This is an opportunity for a number of our teams, 2 of our teams. We have a total of 4 redundant teams that are supporting the emergency plan to go through training and to maintain their qualifications as part of our emergency response organization as it stands today. And then lastly, we had reported at the last meeting that the U.S. Nuclear Regulatory Commission no longer has full-time residents on staff. However, they continue to do inspection activities under the decommissioning inspection program. Earlier in the year, we transitioned from the reactor oversight process, which is an operating plant inspection program, to a decommissioning inspection program. One of the inspectors was here last week doing a routine inspection. The scope of that inspection is informed by that NRC decommissioning program. Things that were looked at included the groundwater program, radiation controls, our system abandonment work, and some of the design work that we've done at the site. And the inspector debriefed with no issues identified. And debriefed essentially means they'll do exits at the end of each quarter. So at the end of September, when they finish this quarter's inspection activities, they'll do a formal exit and they'll issue an inspection report very similar to what they did when we operated. As far as some of the NRC licensing actions and exemptions that we've requested, these are all specific to our emergency plan. Earlier this year, we were granted the first change to our emergency plan, that's known as the post-shutdown E-Plan License Amendment Request. That was approved by the NRC on February 4th. We implemented that on February 5th. That covers the period that we're in right now through approximately April of 2016. We call that SAFSTOR period 1, and I'll have a little timeline in the next slide. Along with that, of course, we have had some interest and some concern on the part of various agencies. In this particular case, the state did file an appeal to the Commission to keep the Emergency Response Data System, or ERDS, in place. This is a data system that we would have had in place while we operated that sends data electronically to the NRC. The state of Vermont also had access to that. So the state has appealed to the Commission to keep ERDS, and we're expecting the Commission decision in the 4th quarter of this year or 1st quarter of next year. When you appeal to the Commission, it's uncertain as to how quickly they'll respond. Generally, it's between 6 and 12 months. The second 2 are kind of related. We have a certain number of exemption requests that we have requested. These essentially are changes to our license that puts us more in line with a decommissioned site as opposed to an operating site. We did get endorsement from the NRC commissioners that our exemptions should be granted. The NRC staff is in the process of working through the process of issuing those. They have to do with our permanently defueled E-plan and changes to our emergency action levels. The state has some concerns about that, filed a petition for reconsideration of the commission vote. That was back in March, and again, because these commission decisions take quite a while, we're expecting the earliest that would come in is probably the fourth quarter of this year. And then finally, one of the more significant changes to our emergency plan, which will go into effect in April of 2016, assuming the approvals are on schedule, has to do with reducing our emergency plan commensurate with the risks at the site. And as I reported at some of the other presentations, essentially the only risks are associated with the storage of dry fuel. So we expect that if the NRC is on schedule, we would be hoping to get that approval by the end of this year. Again, it's an estimate. The state has filed petitions to intervene in that process. That was before the Atomic Safety and Licensing Board. The board did deny the state the opportunity to intervene. However, the state has appealed that to the commission. And again, we're in that process of waiting for a commission decision. So this is the timeline that we've actually had up before, but I thought it would be appropriate since it's been a while since we've kind of talked about the timeline. So we have our project divided into a number of phases. The first one is called SAFSTOR 1. That phase is the current state that we're in with our emergency plan. It requires us to have an emergency plan based on having fuel in the pool. It went into effect in February of 2015, and we expect to have that in place through April of next year. At that point, if we've received approval from the NRC, we'll go into what is called a permanently defueled emergency plan. Again, we'll have a very robust emergency plan, but the events are much different. Essentially, we would not have releases outside of the site boundary, and commensurate with that, we would reduce the staffing of our emergency planning organization. Once we have all the fuel moved from wet to dry, which is scheduled to be complete in 2020, we would then transition into what is known as the ISFSI, or Dry Gas Fuel Storage Emergency Plan. A little bit about emergency plan funding. Obviously, as we reduce our staff, as we reduce our emergency plan, commensurate with the reduced risks and the limited number of events, we would also expect that the funding going along with supporting that really needs to be focused on that new plan. So a number of the things that will be changed is that the offsite emergency measures will be consistent with what is known as an all hazards planning approach. So essentially be reaching out to kind of local entities like fire and medical support in and around the plant area. The emergency planning zones would shrink to within the site boundaries, so we would no longer have the 10-mile EPZ. And instead of having the 4 classifications of events, this new plan would only have 2, an unusual event and an alert classification. Really the focus is making sure that in the future we provide funding to local support based on populations, and that these funds are essentially on a declining scale. Recently, we worked collaboratively with the state of New Hampshire, and we worked out an agreement. It's a 4-year agreement, which is fiscal 17, so it'll start in June of next year, right through 2020. And this covers both the emergency planning and the Department of Health costs for the state of New Hampshire. The total cost over the 4 years on a declining scale is $279,000. We've been contacted by the state of Massachusetts, and we're about to enter into discussions for a similar arrangement with Massachusetts. A couple other licensing actions, some of which you probably read recently in the paper. Entergy did file quite a while back an intent to change one of the conditions in our operating license. We have a requirement to provide a 30-day notification to the Nuclear Regulatory Commission in advance of any withdrawals from the Nuclear Decommissioning Trust. We were going to be granted that, however, the state filed a petition to intervene in that process. They had about 5 contentions that they were concerned with. They added some additional contentions, and the Atomic Safety and Licensing Board recently allowed 2 of those 5 contentions to be before a hearing. So no decision's been made, but in essence, a hearing process would be in effect. After we've reviewed that decision by the Atomic Safety and Licensing Board, we have opted to withdraw that license amendment request, and we will continue to comply with the existing licensing requirements, that being providing that 30-day notice prior to taking any withdrawals from the trust. And then finally, we were approved to use the Nuclear Decommissioning Trust for more than just the radiological decommissioning, consistent with exemptions that were provided by the NRC. It's called the commingled fund exemption. That was approved back in June of this year. The state of Vermont, along with Green Mountain Power and Vermont Yankee Nuclear Power Corporation, the former owner of Vermont Yankee, petitioned the DC Circuit Court for review of the NRC's issuance of that exemption. So in essence, they are petitioning the NRC, not Entergy. However, we did file a motion to at least be a party to it, and we have not received the approval back, but expect to hear that back from the district court shortly. As far as interactions with the various state agencies, as many of you know, we're in the process of going through the proceedings for a second dry cask fuel storage pad through the Public Service Board and the Certificate of Public Good process. We're fairly well along with that. We filed our supplemental pre-filed testimony back in May, explaining why the new dry cask storage pad belongs in the location that it is based on the science and the engineering. Intervention was granted to a number of entities, including New England Coalition, the Wyndham Regional Commission, and the town of Vernon, as well. The Agency for Natural Resources and the Public Service Department are kind of automatic parties to any certificate of public good. The Public Service Board issued an order limiting the various issues that a number of the interveners should be focused on, that being NEC, Wyndham Regional Commission, and the town of Vernon, to the impacts on the local environment, the reuse of the Vermont Yankee property, regional planning issues, and aesthetics. So any comments from any of those various interveners should stay focused to those 4 topics. We completed the first 2 rounds of discovery. That's agencies asking questions of us back in July. We then received pre-filed testimony from the various departments that I mentioned and the Wyndham Regional Commission, as well as New England Coalition, back in August. We've sent out our discovery requests, so these are our questions of those agencies or interveners, that being ANR and Wyndham Regional Commission. We did not have any questions for the Department of Public Service because they in essence supported the design and location of the new pad. We did very recently on September 18th filed an objection to the admission of the pre-filed testimony of NEC, that provided by Mr. Ray Chavez. And the basis for that, in essence, was that the issues that they addressed were not relevant to the CPG proceeding. In other words, the 4 areas that I described earlier were not adhered to, exceeded the limit scope of intervention allowed by the board, and addressed areas that are preempted by federal law. Next steps is that we'll be providing our responses to the discovery request at the end of September, and again, our target for approval is May of 2016. Last agency, Department of Public Health, we did receive a request for information back in April on the lead and asbestos programs. We provided our response, and I believe those issues are complete. A couple other agencies or divisions within ANR that we've been working with. The Waste Management Division of DEC conducted a site visit and inspection back on May 18th. They made a number of observations having to do with the storage of hazardous waste on site. We had a follow-up letter from ANR providing a number of what is known as apparent or alleged violations. We had 35 days to respond to that, and we did provide a letter back on earlier providing a response to those, and hopeful that we've corrected and addressed all of those issues. And then finally, we were made aware by the state that there's a new program that went into effect in March of this year, having to do with the river corridor. So work along the Connecticut River in this case may have an impact on development or new projects. So this may apply to the installation of our second ISPA pad. We're working with that division very closely to determine whether this permit is necessary for the location, and if so, we will be applying for that permit commensurate with our construction schedule, which is next summer. Insofar as our continued commitment to communication and outreach, of course this is one of the forums to get information out to the public. We've been doing a number of speaking engagements in and around Windham County and across the state of Vermont, as well as in New Hampshire and Massachusetts. We continue to stay very closely involved with the community. Our employees who live and have lived in this area for a long time continue to be stewards of the community and want to be involved. And we've also facilitated a number of tours at the site as time allows. The table show, as you know, has been going on now for about 6 months, another way to interview individuals with specialized expertise, either in decommissioning or experience in various areas. The latest one was just taped last week. And of course, all the information that we put out is in the media. Any letters back and forth with any of the agencies, NRC, are all posted on our website daily, bydecommissioning.com. And this is a screenshot from our latest SAFSTOR Matters cable TV show. Episode 6 featured the Maine Yankee Public and Government Relations Manager, Eric Howes, who gave a very good overview of what happened at Maine Yankee, one of the sites here in New England that's completed decommissioning.
Thank you, Joe. I think now Tony Lezinski is going to come up and give the update from the state of Vermont.
This will be interesting because I think Joe covered about 2/3 of what I was going to discuss. And that's fine. I mean, that shows we're pretty much on the same page on many of the items. Okay, so as Joe mentioned, the state has a number of contentions, and two of them regarding discontinuation of PERDs and opposition to reduction in the emergency planning zone. We are awaiting NRC action, basically a ruling from the commission itself. We have had some movement in the area regarding the decommissioning trust fund discussions, and Joe did touch on a number of those. He's bouncing here. The major thing is, as Joe pointed out, we did file a petition to intervene regarding the 30-day notification licensing amendment request. And there were oral arguments given on July 7th. Resulting from those oral arguments, the Atomic Safety Licensing Board ruled to grant a hearing on two of the contentions. One of the contentions was really just that we had provided enough information to draw questions on whether all of the proposed expenditures were actually legitimate. This is kind of moot at this point because Vermont Yankee did request to withdraw the licensing amendment request. So at this point, we are awaiting that there is an ASLB ruling on that motion. So the withdrawal is not official until that ruling occurs, is my understanding. Certificate of Public Good has been pointed out. We are proceeding on with that. At this point, the state sides, the non-petitioners are responding to questions from Vermont Yankee. And coming up, we do have that Vermont Yankee can file discovery on the pre-filed testimony, which will have, which will continue. Subsequent to that, there will be a round of rebuttal that will conclude on October 21st, and then we continue with additional portions of discovery. I want to know why I always manage to hit this button twice. Regarding support for the Citizens Advisory Panel, we did 6 of the panelists, and I did travel to Connecticut Yankee to tour the spent fuel storage facility. There will be some discussion on that later, so I just mentioned that now. One thing that a number of people have been asking for, and we now have this available, the Citizens Advisory Panel does have its own email address now, and it is listed there in all caps, psd.ndcap, and then in lowercase at vermont.gov. The PSD, we really didn't want to put that there. However, the state IT department insisted that we did. Their naming convention requires a first name and a last name, so we have to put in something that's like, well, okay, this is on a public service department website, so we'll go with that. The intention is to have hot links available on the NDCAP webpage, so that if you're reviewing something on the webpage, we hope to have commentary up there that you can send an email right from the page. That has not been set up yet. That's only because we just got the email address working the way we wanted it to just yesterday. We just haven't had time to update the web page. But the web page will be refreshed. There's some information on there now that was very good to have when this panel started last year. We're not going to eliminate that that information, but we're going to move it around so that the more current information is what you see first. You just have to laugh at this. Okay, and just some additional relevant activities. Yeah, okay, I got everything on there. We have been getting a number of inquiries coming really through me from the Department of Energy and the NRC in preparation for the eventual removal of spent fuel from the Vermont Yankee site. Now realize that there is no national repository yet. However, the Department of Energy is at least in the planning stages for its transport. So related to that, the state was asked to provide its oversized truck transportation requirements. And I did have to make contact with the Agency of Transportation for that. But that information was provided. And where that information will wind up is the Department of Energy puts out an annual report on the status of spent fuel storage around the country. And in particular, it begins to identify transportation options for moving that spent fuel to a national repository. So the report is, it typically comes out in May of a given calendar year, but the information in it is current as of the previous September 30th. So all of these information requests came in because the report is due, but we won't see the results of that report until May or June of next year. However, this will be the first time that Vermont Yankee is mentioned, is noted in the report, because now for the first September 30th, Vermont Yankee is undergoing decommissioning. Related to that, there are a number of other NRC and Department of Energy activities coming up. There are a number of high-level right-of-ways transportation planning meetings going on. These are meetings that I am Vermont's representative to those meetings, backed up by Dr. Irwin. So between the two of us, we try to get to all of the meetings and the webinars. There are also a number of other activities coming up. In the first full week of October, there is an industry nuclear decommissioning and spent fuel storage summit that Commissioner Recchia and I believe Kate O'Connor are speaking at, and I know there will be a number of Entergy representatives as well. There's also a lot of movement on the NRC side discussing decommissioning planning, decommissioning rulemaking, and efforts regarding spent fuel storage. So the NRC is having a number of public meetings via webinar and teleconference. So whenever possible, I make it a point to at least monitor those. I know there is one coming up on the overall decommissioning program on October 1st, and I do need to find out more information on that because I have a number of conflicts that day, but I would like to listen in on this if I can. And lastly, nearby in Amherst, Massachusetts, in mid-October, I believe it's October 21st, there is the first conference of the Institute of Nuclear Host Communities. It is part of a larger geological conference, but there is a one-day program that there will be some state presentations made there, as well as some Entergy presentations, and I believe some other people that are in the room here right now will be making presentations as well. So just a reminder, all information from the NDCAP meetings will be available on what NDCAP is now using as its website, which is a Public Service Department website. The address is noted there. And to remind people again, we now have an email address for contacting the members of the panel, and is listed there. And also just a reminder that besides that, you always have the option to go through the Public Service Department's Consumer Affairs and Public Information Division to get information or questions or comments to this panel. What typically happens is Kathy gets comments, they pass them on to me, and then as necessary, I pass them to the panel. So far, most of the questions that have come in have really been directed towards me. And with that, I would ask if any of the other representatives from Public Service Department, ANR, or Department of Health, if they have anything to add at this point. And if not, any questions?
All right. We're going to shift over in just a second to Steve's going to give us an update on the Connecticut Yankee trip in 1 second, but I just want to ask you one thing. The October 1st conference call, is that something that people in the panel, if they're interested, they can listen into as well?
Yes.
So
yes. I can circulate the information on that. There's more information I need to find out about it. It is right now it is simply described as a public meeting and teleconference, but what I don't know is whether this will simply be presentations by NRC staff to the commissions, or will there be an opportunity for public comment?
If we can listen in, whether or not there's public comment,
sure,
we would love to.
Okay. So.
And before I go over to Steve, I just want to talk about the email address. Everybody should know when you email that email address, it becomes public record. So if you're going to say something that you don't want anyone else to ever see, it's going to be public record when you put it, send it to that email address. And also, you're going to get an automated response back. That does not mean we're not looking at it. So I don't want somebody to get that and think this has just gone into the ether somewhere, you're never going to see it. So it will be seen by the panel and become part of the public record. Okay, Steve, do you want to give us, we're going to have a larger or longer briefing on the Connecticut Yankee trip next meeting. But we want to give you just a short snippet of what we did.
Sure. Just a quick overview on our trip to Connecticut Yankee on June 26th. There were 6 members of this panel, as well as Tony Lashinsky, that went down to Connecticut Yankee, which is located in Haven Neck on the Connecticut River in Connecticut. And we met with people there at the site who are in charge of that site at this point, and people who've been in the industry for a number of years. I don't know whether you all have the handout, but I'm not going to go through each bullet in detail because we're going to have more detail on it in November. But just quickly to summarize, the visit was, I thought, very productive from the standpoint of seeing the physical location, both of the site and what the site looks like now, and also to see where the field storage facility is located at that site, which is a very different site than what Vermont Yankee has. There is also in this handout a table, timeline table for the various Yankee plants. The Yankee plants that have been decommissioned or are in the process of being decommissioned are listed there, including Connecticut Yankee, Maine Yankee, Yankee Row, and of course Vermont Yankee. Their staff fairly abbreviated at this point, and as mentioned, they're very few people actually. There was some mention made of the maintenance that has to go on for the Cask storage location. They have in the 6th bullet on the 2nd page there, they have a staff that is operating on, they call it the firehouse model, where everybody is capable of sweeping the floor and shoveling snow and all of that stuff. So it's not compartmentalized as we know it in some functional or some operating plants. The Cask system is a little bit different than the VY system. It's an NAC system, and not similar to Holtec, but there are some differences. And they're named there in that paragraph. They have an annual operating budget of $10 million. And the actual owner-controlled area, they're specifying a 300-meter radius for that owner-controlled area. And apparently 100 meters is a minimum requirement there. Total site acreage much larger than VY, of 525 acres. And of course, their entire facility is no longer visible. There is a slight rise in the ground where the reactor building used to sit, but other than that, really not possible to tell there was even a nuclear plant there. And the last bullet there mentions that they did prompt decommissioning at Connecticut Yankee because they felt it had lower costs. There was institutional memory that was utilized. And it was a community benefit, and they are trying to plan for potential future use. However, they haven't really come upon any future use that they want to use it for yet. And so that's in summary the meeting. Did you want me to entertain questions, Kate, or not?
Unless it's something vital that people can't wait to ask at the next.
We will be reviewing the topic in November.
In more detail.
And I'd be happy to talk to anyone off meeting here on that as well.
Does anybody on the panel have any comments or questions for either the state or Entergy based on the presentations? Chris?
My phone is off, so I shouldn't make it as good. So I guess the first one, for the state and Entergy, the decision to withdraw the request from the NRC, was that a unilateral decision by Entergy, or was there discussion between the state and Entergy about them withdrawing?
Thanks, Chris. There was some discussion. There was an agreement on how to do the withdrawal, but Entergy did decide to do the withdrawal. Vermont is interested in conditions on the withdrawal, which there was some discussion of but weren't resolved. So we'll be pursuing those with the ASLB when we present before them. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I guess I didn't know if there were any other negotiations for things the state wants or things
Well,
entity wants.
So, Chris, I'd welcome your and you guys' participation in this, but, you know, I think Entergy looked at this and said, this isn't worth fighting over, and we would agree, we would have agreed earlier, but nonetheless, this is where we are. That said, the state of Vermont doesn't just want the 30-day notice, we'd actually, with a number that says this is what we're drawing this on. We want to see the details of what's involved. And we're going to use the ASLB if they are willing to try and gain that. So that's a disagreement we have, but it's respectful, and I appreciate the fact that Entergy looked at this and said, this is just not worth fighting over. And we agree with that.
Yeah, I have to concur. I think Commissioner Recky's characterization is pretty accurate. I would pretty much characterize it as legal, professional courtesy to notify the two other groups involved before we made a decision to actually withdraw that. But it's a fact that you know, we have been submitting these for the past 9 months. It's an administrative task fundamentally. It doesn't add a lot of value to what we do, but we can continue to do that, and to continue to you know, fight a legal battle over that doesn't make any sense in terms of resources involved. You know, one thing to mention, I mean, in that we do submit these requests to NRC. Chris Reckie gets a copy of that every month. We otherwise are informing the state what the decommissioning trust fund value is on a monthly basis, as well as the site restoration fund. So there is other information that's being provided to the state in this area. But there were there were no other items being discussed other than the withdrawal of that LAR specifically.
Kate, I just a couple other. On the, Tony, you said you supplied the state oversized truck transportation requirements to DOE and participated in upcoming DOE high-level radioactive waste transport planning efforts. Did you solicit input from the towns? And I'm not aware that when the regional, as the regional transportation coordinator, was touch base with either.
I'm sorry, I haven't realized. Let me get to it.
Did you hear what I asked?
Yes, I did. No, just to answer the question directly, this planning effort is really Department of Energy driven. So at this point, there wasn't really an opportunity for consulting. This is more find out what the Department of Energy wants to do. So we're really at the very beginning of the process. Case in point, just probably about 6 weeks ago, the planning committee set up a rail task force, and that's really, I think so far the task force has had one meeting. There's a second one coming up later this month. I'm sorry, mid-October. But we're just at the beginning phases of finding out what's necessary and what questions we need to ask.
So I guess I would ask, just please include local governments, including counterparts on either side of the state line, any place where this stuff may be moving through. Because I thought I heard you say that there was a report that was coming out very soon that you were providing information to.
Okay, what's happening there, that is a national report. And the information on it is set as of September 30th, but that report won't be coming out until May or June of next year. And that will just have very basic information on what are the potential transportation options for high-level waste.
And the last thing, thanks for letting us know about the webinar on the first. It'd be great if, as part of NDCAP support, of the state's support of NDCAP, or entities too, for that matter, if you could get us that information as soon as you get it, whether you think anybody's going to be interested in it.
Okay.
Or even if you don't know what it is. At least that way we can begin to say, hey, there may be something.
Okay, sir.
There. Thank you very much.
Anyone else on the panel have any questions for the state and Entergy? Okay, can I just clarify one thing before I go on? You're still going in front of the Atomic Safety Licensing Board to see if you could get Entergy to tell you what the money that they're withdrawing from the fund is used for. Is that the quick? Okay.
Yeah, you don't even need to pass me the microphone. That is correct.
Okay, just want to make sure that I understood it and everybody else did. Okay, next up we're going to have a presentation, and it's going to be a dual presentation. Erica Borneman, who's with the Vermont Division of Emergency Management and Homeland Security, and Bill Irwin are going to sort of tag team and do a presentation about the emergency response during the decommissioning. So I think we have Erica first.
Good evening. Thank you very much for inviting me down to present to the panel. My name is Erica Borneman. I am the Chief of Staff for the Division of Emergency Management and Homeland Security for the state of Vermont. And just for a little bit of context, I have overseen the Radiological Emergency Response Program, or REP, as you will probably hear me say, since 2012, and I worked in the program before that. And so I've had a few years of experience working within the REP program, and actually for most of our division REP and the preparedness activities that go into that have seeped into every other facet of all hazards planning, and you will see a little bit of that as we go through the presentation. Okay, I'm going to just spend about the next 15 minutes to discuss the current REP program and under the current requirements, and then we'll talk a little bit about what the future requirements are and what the potential impacts of those are, and what we at the state of Vermont really feel should be a part of the REP program going forward. Radiological emergency plans are federally mandated, and they, by 44 CFR Part 350, and new Reg 0654 sets the specific requirements for emergency preparedness. So the part of the CFR is pretty broad. The Reg gets a little bit into more detail, and then we looked at program guidance from FEMA and the NRC for in more detail regarding emergency preparedness requirements, both on-site and off-site. I am specifically, for the purposes of this presentation, speaking about off-site requirements, because that is where my agency oversees compliance with. Each state agencies, towns, special facilities, and more have plans for if there is an incident at Vermont Yankee. That is how it currently stands today. Each town has an emergency operations plan specifically related to an incident at Vermont Yankee. There are also plans for what they're referred to as special facilities for childcare facilities, schools, hospitals, as well as a number of other facilities that would need to be activated in response to an incident at Vermont Yankee. DEMHS, Emergency Management and Homeland Security, is the primary agency responsible for local and state plan development and revision, and we coordinate with other agencies such as the Department of Health, as well as others to carry out that mission. In every state that has a nuclear power plant, there's an emergency planning zone established around the nuclear power plant, and that is for the purposes of lighting, but basically establishing an area where towns and entities have specific requirements that they need to show that they can reasonably, they can show the federal government provide reasonable assurance that they can respond to an incident at Vermont, or at the nuclear power plant, in this case Vermont Yankee. In all cases, the plume exposure pathway, or emergency planning zone, is approximately 10 miles in diameter, or in diameter around the nuclear power plant. And so if you look at the box on the left-hand side, is the 10-mile plume exposure pathway. In Vermont, that covers the towns of Brattleboro, Dummerston, Guilford, Halifax, Marlborough, and Vernon. Obviously, it covers smaller portions of, say, the town of Marlborough, but for planning purposes, we include them in all of those activities because their folks would be impacted just as the other emergency planning zone towns would be. In addition to a plume exposure pathway, there's also identified the ingestion pathway zone, which is a 50-mile radius, and that is for the purposes of the further impact should there be a release. And as you can see, that extends down to the Connecticut border and actually out into New York and New Hampshire. Plan evaluation is done on an ongoing basis. The licensee has a requirement that they have to conduct quarterly exercises on site. The state and local off-site response organizations participate in those on a quarterly basis. But in addition to that, the NRC and FEMA also evaluate both the state and the licensee on a biennial basis. And so every 2 years, we just actually completed an evaluated exercise back in May. The state, and actually in our case, is a tri-state basis with Massachusetts and New Hampshire, are evaluated through a number of, based on a number of criteria covering the spectrum of evacuation, notification, operational coordination, communications, public information, you name it. That is what we are evaluated on. And those 2-year exercises are based on an 8-year exercise cycle. And over the course of 8 years, we need to show that we have been evaluated against the full spectrum of evaluation criteria. And that also includes out-of-sequence evaluations, so to basically check plans, which we just did with FEMA this past summer for schools, childcare centers, healthcare facilities, and the like. One of the major changes, especially as it relates to plan evaluation, between an operating reactor and an independent spent fuel storage installation, or ISFSI, is that the ISFSIs are required to have an on-site exercise every 2 years, and off-site response organizations are invited to the exercise but are required to participate and are not evaluated like the licensee is. This is just a slide to show the response structure and to kind of illustrate the different entities that come into play. Obviously at the top we have the Vermont governor, Massachusetts governor, New Hampshire governor, and response activities overarchingly directed by the State Emergency Operations Center. And obviously, at least on the state level side, bringing, and I'm not going to go through all of this, but it just illustrates that there are a number of parties that come to the table. This, over the years, we have prepared for what really would be the largest scale response that we would have to complete. And so in order to be prepared for that, we have been committed for a very long time in making sure that our plans and our personnel are up to speed on what they need to be able to do. This chart, again, I'm not going to go too far into detail about this, but this shows the escalation of facility activation as well as precautionary and protective action measures that would need to be in place, and public notification, minimum public notifications that would need to occur as you would move through this classification, the emergency classifications. And this is basically how it's been done for a long time while the reactor was operating, and it currently is the standard today. So in terms of what towns, the 6 emergency planning zone towns, as well as the emergency planning zone towns in New Hampshire and Massachusetts have needed to maintain, each town has a designated emergency management director, as well as radiological officer and secondary user carrier identified, and about 5 to 10 staff that are trained to respond in the Emergency Operations Center. The function of Emergency Operations Center is to coordinate all response activities in that town, and let me tell you that the emergency planning zone towns are at a pretty steep advantage in terms of incident management as compared to the rest of the towns in Vermont. Because of the continued exercise opportunities, training opportunities that they have had over the years, they really have had the chance to come together and prepare in a way that many other towns may not do on a regular basis. So, they participate in training. They do monthly radio checks to make sure their communications equipment is running, equipment checks for especially their radiological equipment, the quarterly EOC exercises that they participated with the state as well as Vermont Yankee, and the, I should say biennial, not biennial, biennial payment exercise, and maintaining their town plans as well as all of their equipment. So what does it take in broad terms to support a program like this? Well, for this state fiscal year, the REP program budget was $1.6 million. That I'm going to point out that that is completely and totally paid for by Vermont Yankee, and has been, the REP fund has been paid for by them for at least as long as I can remember, but again, I only go back 8 years, so. But my predecessors also worked on the program for quite a long time. We have 3 actually 4, if you count our temp, which I do because all of them shoulder all of the activities that go on. And we have a field office located here in Brattleboro. They're primarily responsible for coordinating with the towns, having a local point of contact, and making sure that equipment and maintenance is done, training is delivered, exercises are conducted, and the like, and plans are updated. In addition to my agency, the emergency planning zone towns receive a baseline of $32,000 a year out of the REP fund to support these activities, as well as a number of state agencies such as the Department of Health, the Agriculture, and the like listed up there. WTSA also receives a grant every year to support the emergency alert system capability within the EPZ. You've seen this timeline, and I don't need to go through this, but just to point out that as we move through the timeline in terms of planning and in kind of quantifying a risk profile for Vermont Yankee, there are a number of milestones that have occurred and will occur in the future that basically change the risk profile for VY. The first, obviously, was the reactor shutdown, and then the next was getting the fuel out of the reactor, but we still have a ways to go in terms of the full evolution of that risk profile, which is getting the fuel out of the spent fuel pool and into dry cask storage, as well as other ways into storage, and then finally demolishing and doing complete decontamination. The next two slides are meant to illustrate the changing requirements as outlined in the NRC. And this slide and the next slide, I actually pulled the information directly from a couple of NRC slides, so you may have seen this before. But the requirements for offsite emergency preparedness changed significantly once, and historical precedence has shown in other decommissioned power plants that are now SPC locations. I'm sorry, I keep cutting out.
Yeah, just keep it up because it keeps
on. Emergency planning requirements for standalone SPCs, that means all, that generally means all fuel in dry cask storage, is that formal offsite emergency plans are not required. Basically, the NRC expects that former EPZ towns will incorporate this hazard or any existing hazard into their all hazards emergency operations plans. Basically, in our speak, that's local emergency operations plans that every town is required to have. Typically, the highest classification is an alert. And so you, based on the requirements, the planning is not for anything higher than an alert emergency classification. On-site exercises are required with the opportunity for off-site participation. So what that means is that the agencies and off-site response organizations that have previously been evaluated by FEMA and been required to show reasonable assurance that they can respond to an incident at VY are no longer have those requirements. And what it also means is that the licensee is no longer required to support those activities off-site. And then according to previous historical precedents, training and exercise basically is done on an invitational basis. This just shows the difference, and you can see that in the handout. It shows the difference between the requirements that an operating reactor has and the requirements that a decommissioned site has, pointing out that for the requirements that an SPC has, a HAB event is actually not considered, and I should say a HAB, hostile action-based event, is not considered. The site emergency response organization, or ERO, is streamlined, as well as notification and communication to offsite response organizations, requirements for notification, and requirements for public alert and warning all change. Oops. So what does this mean for the REP program as we move forward? If the license member requests are granted, that really specifically for the emergency planning zone towns and DMHS and the REP program, that essentially takes a relatively robust program for what has always been a relatively robust risk to plan for, from 100 to 0. And so what we are working towards is basically a step-down approach to emergency preparedness. The dynamics change, the hazards change, and so while that doesn't mean that planning efforts and training and making sure that personnel are educated about the hazards and the response to it, it doesn't go away, it just changes. And so therefore, really what we should be seeing is that the emergency planning zone towns remain for the purposes of some planning and training and exercise requirements that are scaled back. Not what they used to be, but certainly not nothing. What we would like to see is biennial planning workshops, which are basically discussion-based exercises with Vermont Yankee, as well as participation in their biennial operations-based exercises that they have to participate in on-site. That requires on-site response organizations such as fire, police to be involved, and also ensures that while their plans at the local level change, that those elements related to Vermont Yankee aren't completely done away with. We also need to ensure that there is at least some staff planning level support from DMHS for those towns that, like I said, are going from a robust program to something that they haven't, none of them that have been involved in emergency management have ever actually really seen before, which is the requirements that other towns currently have, which is nothing other than state statutory requirements. And then as we move forward again, once the fuel is out of the pool, which is really the primary timeline that we're concerned about, is while that fuel remains in the pool and is not in dry gas storage. Once the fuel is in dry gas storage, obviously the risk profile changes again, and then we can see the planning requirements for towns change to consistent with how other plants have typically prepared for an incident at an ISFC. In conclusion, every town has statutorily required to have an emergency management director and to have an emergency management program. But the difference between those towns that they've had the funding, the support, the opportunity to maintain a level of preparedness that many of the other towns don't have and really need to work much harder at maintaining. That's not to say that the EPC towns won't step up to the challenge. And we've worked with a number of the folks over the years. They're great people to work with. They're very committed to emergency preparedness within their towns. And the folks in this general area really should, at any time, reach out to them if they have any questions, or any of my staff if you have any questions about the emergency preparedness related to Vermont Yankee. Thanks.
We're going to try to see if a second microphone would be beneficial.
Good evening.
This is a presentation from the perspective of the Vermont Department of Health. We are partner with other agencies to try to implement the radiological emergency response plan for Vermont Yankee, and a part of that since before the plant was actually constructed. So the current needs and capabilities according to Entergy and the NRC, and Erica touched on this, is that through April 2016, the incidents that require off-site response are spent fuel accidents, including those that result in overheating of the spent fuel within the spent fuel pool. Other incidents, according to Entergy and the NRC, don't require an off-site response because the dose to the public from the accidents will be less than the Environmental Protection Agency, EPA, Protective Action Guidelines. The resources that are supported by Entergy through April 2016, because there's fiscal years that actually goes through June 30, 2016, are those needed by the 6 emergency planning zone towns, EOC, State Emergency Operations Center, and several state agencies, as described previously. Now, the capabilities that are supported include notifications, continuous communication, evacuation, shelter, reunification, radiological accident assessment, radiological environmental assessment, incident management, law enforcement, fire safety, emergency medical services, food and water protection, restrictions and replacement, and recovery. And I just want to draw a note to the fact that of those bullets there, and this is a very summary list, we go on to great detail with these, is that really only law enforcement, fire safety, emergency medical services, and incident management to some degree, and notifications and continuous communications would be funded after April 2016. All of the rest of those functions, should they be needed, would not be funded after this current fiscal year, again, ending next June 30th. The needs and capabilities, according to Entergy and the NRC, is that there are no accidents that would result after the fuel is removed, after a certain amount of cool down of the spent fuel, that would result in doses in excess of the EPA tags. Now that's an important thing, and hopefully some of you will take a look at the web page that I've copied there, where you can actually look at the Environmental Protection Agency Protective Action Guidelines. As such, Entergy and the NRC state that no off-site capabilities beyond what local fire, law enforcement, and emergency medical services can provide require Entergy support. Now, these EPA Protective Action Guidelines, according to the document itself, are not to be used to address or impact site cleanups occurring under or other statutory authorities, such as the US EPA's Superfund program and the NRC's decommissioning program, or other federal or state cleanup programs. Nonetheless, Entergy and the NRC use EPA tags as guidance to address emergency planning during site cleanup occurring under the NRC decommissioning program. As you can imagine, we disagree with that position. The purpose of the EPA Protective Action Guidelines is to help public officials decide whether to evacuate, shelter in place, administer potassium iodide, provide alternate sources of water, interdict food or milk, and other actions. Again, this is quoted from the manual itself. These actions are designed to avoid public doses over specific thresholds. The EPA tags were not intended to determine whether facilities support off-site emergency response capabilities. Nonetheless, Entergy and the NRC use the EPA tags for that purpose. I'm sorry that this cannot be seen. If you're much closer, you can actually read it. This is a table of the doses that require certain steps, as I mentioned, evacuation, shelter in place, potassium iodide. And these are very significant doses. For example, 1,000 milligram, 5,000 milligram, or 2,000 milligram doses. We believe at the Department of Health that the needs of emergency planning are not based solely on dose. doses below the EPA Protective Action Guidelines are unacceptable from incidents occurring at a shutdown nuclear power station awaiting cleanup. What yields dose to members of the public is contamination, and that is contamination released and deposited off-site by the plant. If it's considered acceptable to have releases that are below the EPA Protective Action Guidelines, that would be an unacceptable basis, from our opinion, for emergency planning and funding of off-site resources for that emergency planning and response. Off-site radioactive contamination of the environment has human impacts, especially psychosocial and economic impacts. Disregarding the possible added risk of cancer from excess radiation dose, which is likely negligible based on the doses that we're talking about here, the socioeconomic effects can lead to adverse physiological health impacts. Imagine if there are concerns among members of the United States and the rest of the world that the environment is contaminated with radioactivity that was released in a fire from the Vermont Yankee nuclear power station shut down radioactive waste storage facility. Clearly, it would have strong economic impacts, socioeconomic impacts, and those would lead to possibly physiological health impacts. For the Department of Health, we demand a response to contamination, and we believe other Vermonters would demand a response to contamination of their environment and the risk to their economic well-being. This contamination has to be measured. Measurements are made of samples taken from the environment. Samples and measurements are obtained, calculated, interpreted by, and acted upon by people with skills other than those possessed by firefighters, law enforcement officers, and emergency medical service providers. And those would be the only off-site responders funded after June 30th, 2016. The state has developed and time-tested exceptional capabilities for these functions. Each year that passes after the state ceases these tasks, the capacity to start them up in response to an incident weakens more. And it's very likely that these kinds of incidents would increase in frequency, especially during Decon, which is scheduled for 40 years from now. More than 40 years from now. Off-site emergency response needs, according to the Department of Health, we concede that most nuclear emergencies for which we've been prepared for decades during reactor operations are not going to occur. And the resources needed for response and recovery may be scaled back. We maintain, however, that zero resources is not the appropriate amount to which the state and local should scale back. What kinds of releases are possible? Leaks, or release of radioactive materials inside structures, systems, and components left in SAFSTOR into either the air or into soil. And the causes include transportation accidents, an air release due to the combustion of radioactive materials by fire, loss of container integrity by the effects of natural phenomena like floods, earthquakes, hostile actions including ground or air attack, and groundwater carriage of radioactive materials in soils on site from past leaks, stack fallout, and surficial spills, which are all documented in the PSDAR as well as other documents. What would we really realistically need? We believe we should continue to independently monitor environmental media around the station. It helps us identify contaminants from the very large quantity of radioactive materials stored on site until the facility is decontaminated and dismantled and the NRC license is terminated. That is projected for 2072, not until, as was previously presented by emergency management, the end of spent fuel in the pool. This keeps our sample collection and analysis skills, which we would need should there be a release, fortified through periodic training. We also believe that we should maintain the capacity to measure hard-to-detect radionuclides like strontium-90 and transuranics, both of which have been significant concerns at other decommissioning sites, including Connecticut Yankee, which we visited recently. The Department of Health can develop a scaled-back budget for what is appropriate during SAFSTOR and Decon. It certainly would be realistic, but appropriate to the needs. Thank you, and I'll be glad to take questions when those are available.
We're going to do panel questions first, and then we're going to have public questions. Are there anyone on the panel that would like to? Chris, I see your hand. Would you like to?
I wasn't actually motioning, but okay. I do have some. I'd like to pose a question to Ms. Borman. First, I apologize in advance if I inhale. Apparently, the microphones don't work well once you stop talking, so I'll try to have a continuous stream of words here. First, I want to thank you sincerely for the work that you have done with your organization over the years. It really is top-notch. I think the recent exercise this year really proved out the organization in the state of Vermont was phenomenal. The organizations in New Hampshire and Massachusetts likewise. Everything worked very, very well. And hats off to all of you for working together very well for a number of years. So thank you sincerely for that. And I agree and understand your comment earlier about proficiency of workers in the area that expect or get a higher level of training than maybe typical. And Joe Lynch had mentioned in his comments, and you reiterated it, that Vermont Yankee will continue to have an emergency plan. It'll be a different emergency plan. Really? Wow. Okay. I'm going to put this thing almost in my mouth, all right? So, anyway, Joe mentioned and you reiterated that Vermont Yankee will continue to have an emergency plan. It'll be a different emergency plan after April 2016. So really, where I'm a little conflicted, I guess, a little bit is the changes that are being forecast and foreseen and planned for are the same changes that presumably occurred at Maine Yankee, Connecticut Yankee Row, all the other plants I presume in Wisconsin right now, Kewanee, similar type of things happening. So in general terms, it seems like you're characterizing this as a want versus a need of what you would like to maintain versus what you must maintain if you consider that FEMA and other state entities have understood what the changes are going to be in emergency planning and accepted them. That being said, Joe mentioned in his comments that we had met with the folks in New Hampshire. We worked out a mutually acceptable agreement for funding, and in fact, we started talking to Massachusetts about that as well. So we would be more than welcome and happy to meet with you at any time to talk about some kind of scaled down support in Vermont, along the lines of what we really have done elsewhere. So, the question I have, I guess, is how do you square in the state the desire to continue to fund emergency planning at a high level, knowing that it's not typical of what the experience out there has been, and the fact that the state has an interest in the Nuclear Decommissioning Trust Fund continuing to grow, and also say paying for things that are nice to have versus must-haves will draw that fund down. So how do you square those two things?
Well, thank you, sir, for your kind comments related to our work. To answer your question, the main difference between Vermont Yankee, as it will exist in the middle of next year, and sites such as Maine Yankee and other ISPCs is that there is still fuel in the spent fuel pool. We're not simply talking about dry cask storage at that time. We're not talking about that until 2020. And so there's a different level of preparedness needed for those set of circumstances. Specifically for the agencies that Vermont Yankee has letters of agreements with in the permanent leak fuel emergency plan, the proposed one in the license amendment request. Those agencies will have the opportunity to participate in training to evaluate those plans and, as according to the letters of agreement, but there's really no requirement, and there's also no evaluation requirement. And any of the exercises that we do, and in fact we're actually preparing for a large exercise next year with the National Guard, we fully evaluate all responders, all participants within that exercise. And it's for the purposes of improving our plans and improving the proficiency of those response personnel. And without the evaluation requirements as outlined by the NRC, then we're really looking at a potentially haphazard plan for remaining prepared and remaining trained. Like I said, we're not saying that it needs to be the same level, but if those organizations, including the state of Vermont, are included in the permanently defueled emergency plan, then the evaluation and the training and the improvement planning that go along with that are above and beyond what, say, is seen elsewhere in the state. We do see other funding opportunity that comes from other hazardous materials. The Community Right to Know Act establishes Tier 2 requirements that every organization or business that's storing a certain amount of hazardous materials has to pay into a fund that's maintained by the state. That fund actually funds most of the equipment and training for the state hazardous materials response team. So I draw that comparison because it's not just simply what the NRC has contested is, an all hazards landscape that is sufficient for a still very technical hazard that will exist while there's fuel in that pool.
Thank you.
Thank you, Erica. Thank you, Bill. I'm going to ask a couple of questions and then make a comment. But so when the spent fuel is in the pool, the NRC deems that as safe or relatively, like within the risk factors that they're concerned about. They think it's basically the same as spent fuel that's in dry cask. Is that correct?
The requirements are the same, yes.
Yes, okay. So the reason they do that, correct, is that they have determined based on seismic impact. You mentioned non-hostile events that are determined to decide if that's safer, right?
Yeah, beyond design basis events, and there's a certain number of beyond design basis events that the NRC requires that they be prepared for.
Right.
That's as much detail as I can provide on that.
That's fine, but it's not.
But it is not a hostile.
Non-hostile, right? Could you describe the last event, the last measured event that we had to exercise, that we had to go through? What the scenario was?
Yes, this previous May, the evaluated exercise that the state of Vermont and Vermont Yankee and EPZ towns took part in and evaluated on was the first evaluated hostile action-based exercise that we have been a part of. And the scenario was based on a terrorist attack at Vermont Yankee. And what they did was a multi-pronged attack, and in the end, they were able to gain access to the spent fuel pool to drain that, and they used an accelerant in the spent fuel pool to start a fire.
Okay, so even though the measure is based on non-hostile actions and the fact that they consider a spent fuel pool to be the same as dry cask virtually in terms of risk, they made us do an exercise which was a hostile action, and to respond to that and to figure out how to respond to that.
Right, and while there's fuel in the pool right now, we are still held, and the licensee is still held to the same requirements as they are when they're an operating reactor. When Entergy has made the case that they should be granted those exemptions that would take those requirements off, there will still be fuel in the pool. It will look similar. Obviously, the content of the pool changes a little bit, but it will look similar to what it did in May. And the emergency response organization on site is also similar.
Okay, thank you. I mean, I guess so the statement part of my comment is, as you all can see, the NRC has an inconsistency here in terms of what they are requiring by appropriate procedure, and then what they require in terms of performance on emergency testing. I gotta believe the emergency testing is a valid way of describing the range of things that can occur. So we feel, I just want to say for the state of Vermont, we feel that as long as the spent fuel is in the pool, that emergency management needs to be maintained in some fashion, not at the same level it was before, but certainly in some fashion. And I find it just astronomical that the NRC has determined that an active system that requires water, people, and paying attention on a regular basis is as effective and as risk-free as a passive system such as a dry cask storage that does not require those things. That is just nonsensical. So, thank you.
I should also add, if I could, that the NRC has also acknowledged this, and that is why, that's why they have taken on rulemaking to look at new Reg 0654, to look at decommissioned sites, because they've acknowledged that the requirements for an ISFC don't take into account decommissioning sites. But unfortunately, we will miss the boat on that because they don't anticipate that rulemaking to be even implemented for pilot until at least 2020.
Just to clarify, I understand your points there, Chris, but the fact is that when drills are developed for any particular thing, so in this case it was hostile action, but previously it could be an operating related drill going back over a number of years, in order to get the desired outcome, i.e. in order to exercise the entire organization, including state entities and whatnot, the drill is manipulated often to get the desired outcome. So you should not necessarily conclude just because we drilled on something means that it's likely or probable or even possible, because often it is an exercise in figuring out how many things must we break, or how many places do drill controllers have to intercede to prevent operations from occurring in order to allow, I'll say, the bad thing to happen, in order to exercise field teams and those kinds of things. So I think it would be an incorrect conclusion that says just because we drilled on something means that particular scenario is particularly likely or not.
Yeah, fair enough, but isn't it extraordinary, or at least ironic, that the NRC would choose that scenario of a hostile action penetrating the fuel pool and causing that problem right after they decided, I mean, literally within months after deciding that spent fuel is as good as dry cask because of seismic issues only. I mean, it's just, it is extraordinary. So that's why I offer it.
I understand it's extraordinary. If I told you the number of times we have drilled on hostile actions since 9/11, we would have a very, very long list. Not all included state entities, but the site. After 9/11, the security posture was lot. There was a lot of drilling that went on, and not necessarily because it's more likely, because we recognize the need to do it.
I appreciate that, and I wonder then why are we why since 9/11 are we exercising for hostile actions and not then recognizing them in the context of the risk associated with spent fuel pools? I mean, either do one or the other, and I don't really care which we do, to be honest with you. I think that, I hope that the risk of a hostile action is extremely low, but then eliminate that from the scenarios and say, you know what, we don't think it's real, and we're going to do this and this. But if you include that in the context of mobilizing all these forces that Erica has described, then you would think you would recognize that in the context of how to manage that fuel for the next several years.
We could talk all night.
Yeah. I want to do like a time check because we're running out of panel time. We need to move to public comment. But if you folks have short questions and maybe short answers, that would be great.
Hi, I got a question or two for Bill. So Bill, I really appreciate your presentation. Just so I can understand correctly, one of your main concerns is that the state monitoring will be phased out, and that by the time the actual decommissioning takes place and the plant is, deassembled and cut up and things moved around, people won't be trained and ready at the same level they are now to do the monitoring that would be necessary at that time. Is that what you're saying, partly?
Yes, Derek. In effect, the funding of the emergency response program has provided the Department of Health the ability to have full radiochemistry capabilities in its laboratory, to train people from the Agency of Agriculture, Agency of Natural Resources, and Agency of Human Services to collect samples. And if those activities are no longer funded by Entergy or anyone else after June 30th, 2016, those things will have to stop because we don't pay people without funds to do that. We don't maintain equipment without funds to do that. And unfortunately, especially as decades would go by until you got to the final stage of SAFSTOR, went into Decon, started dismantling and decontaminating, you would have to either rehire all new staff or, as you would do over all those ensuing years, simply trust the results of Entergy and its contractors or whoever the owner of Vermont Yankee is at that time.
Right. And a follow-up question. Can you tell me if you know that what's going on at the other decommissioned plants, Maine Yankee, Connecticut Yankee and Rowe, is there any ongoing state monitoring at this point, or is it not happening?
Yeah, that's a good question, Derek. In particular, the plants that were funded by utilities, and that's Maine Yankee, Yankee Rowe, and Millstone, and many of the other plants that closed before they became merchant plants, they were able to continue to fund the Health Department Emergency Planning, Emergency Management Group, until they actually did raise all the buildings, Decon down to the NRC acceptance levels for license termination. And then at the end of license termination, they reduced the environmental surveillance and emergency planning funds, still maintaining some level of those. But we're in a new era with merchant plants that the utilities don't pay for the extra funds to do that. The corporations that own those merchant plants have to do that. So we don't have the kind of capacity in Vermont to go through our utilities to get those kinds of services through rate increases.
Thank you.
I just want to mention some of the town select boards and emergency planning zone towns that asked that Wyndham Regional convene with Vermont Emergency Management a conversation with non-EPZ towns, how they do their work. So in mid-August, we had a meeting up in Jamaica where the EMDs from Jamaica and Londonderry volunteered their own time to meet with the EPZ towns. All the EPZ towns were represented except Vernon. I guess I think they had a conflict. And went over how they exist. And I think it was a good exchange back and forth, because actually the non-EPZ towns, I guess, realized what kind of training the EPZ towns were getting, and then conversely, I think there was some realization about how dedicated the non-EPZ town volunteers are. And just one thing on the industrial accidents, I mean, they're accidents. We've had spectacular, low likelihood, profoundly great impact industrial accidents, whether it's the oil trains in Quebec or elsewhere around the country, whether it's the coal ash reservoirs killing rivers, whether it's Deepwater Horizon, which was never supposed to happen. A lot of places I've lived in, I've watched bad things happen. And,
So could you move, please?
So, yeah, my phone's up. But, so I just think we need to be prepared for, reasonably prepared for what could happen.
We have to move on to public comment, but we're going to let Martin have the final say.
Yeah, I guess this is more of just a point to make. Don't expect anybody to give a positive answer to this, but it seems like we've been sitting here listening to an interesting dialogue between state people and Vermont Yankee people about this question of funding the emergency planning going forward. And it just seems, and we've talked about this before, this has come up at other meetings, it came up as long ago as I think our October meeting last year, that, that just because we pass a certain point in April 2016 doesn't mean that all of a sudden all these risks go away. These are the points that Bill has been making too. But at the same time, today we hear that the state of New Hampshire has sat down, negotiated an agreement, gotten a payment. The state of Massachusetts has requested discussions to do this. So my question is, why doesn't this dialogue just continue, and why doesn't the state of Vermont and Entergy sit down and figure this out and come to an agreement regarding the emergency funding? Have there been no discussions whatsoever so far to try to figure this out?
No. Martin, oh bless you. There have been a lot of discussions, and I cannot, any discussions that we have are confidential until they're done. So forgive me for not filling in details, but I will say we haven't had a ton of discussions. We started them early. And the reality is that that each time that the NRC got ruled in Entergy's favor, the deal got worse. I'll just say that, okay, without getting into more detail. The New Hampshire settlement was a way of trying to put a stick in our eye in Vermont. New Hampshire has Seabrook. They don't need anything from Entergy in order to maintain their emergency management stuff. Massachusetts the same with Pilgrim, and and they don't need. They have ongoing emergency management capabilities, and they don't need a substantial contribution to do this. This is our only nuclear power plant, and so we do need something meaningful and substantial to move forward. So with all due respect to this, I will say, without compromising discussions that we've had, they have been had, I can say that. We did not get where we needed to get to, and we were not asking for a lot. Although the numbers you saw here tonight, the reality is that Entergy paid $4.5 million toward emergency management in the last couple of years on an ongoing basis when they were operating. we were asking for a fraction of that, less than $1 million a year to maintain this through the time the spent fuel pool, the fuel was in the spent fuel pool, and we've not been able to settle that. So, absolutely conversations are occurring. I welcome them to continue, but they have not been fruitful to this point.
We're going to go on to public comment, and what I would ask is, as you saw, this conversation went on a long time, if you can give a short comment or a short question, that way you'll have time to actually, if you have a question, you can get it answered. What I ask is that you come up to the podium and give your name and town that you live in so we can have it for the record.
My name is Chris Williams. I live in Hancock. I live in Hancock, and my question is, can't just yell?
I think it's easier.
Red. My brief question is for Dr. Irwin. First of all, I want to thank you for your compelling argument to retain the monitoring and response programs at the Department of Health. If you know, I'm just curious what your ballpark estimate is for the scaled-back program, longer term, that you mentioned in your presentation.
So we have, as Commissioner Recchia mentioned, tried to negotiate over the past 18 months. And we've had a variety of figures, but most of them have come down to about $200,000 a year for maintaining the environmental surveillance so that we do splits of all of the samples that Entergy does so that we have inter-laboratory comparison, and that we maintain the training of our teams that conduct both local surveillance as well as food surveillance should those kinds of issues arise with release. And then also any of the equipment that we use for calibration purposes. And most importantly, I think, was the scaled down contract for an outside laboratory that could continue to analyze for strontium-90. We believe that strontium-90 is a very important radionuclide to monitor. It's there in the soils. It's actually been there throughout all of our sampling. We only started reporting it below a certain value when we had a contract laboratory that would report it for us at that level. And it also turned out to be a very significant source of extra costs, especially at Connecticut Yankee, where the cost went well above what they had predicted for the excavation of soils. And transuranics, another kind of radioactive material that requires a specialized laboratory capabilities, was also a driver of extra costs at not only Connecticut Yankee, but also at the main Yankee plant. So we believe having good laboratory capabilities would be a big part of that funding.
Thanks.
Hey, Leo, you have to hold the microphone.
Okay. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes. All right. Thanks, folks. Glad that we can actually talk about safety here now. So my question is really to folks representing the state of Vermont here. My understanding is that the purpose of this interesting mix on this panel is to advise the government of the state of Vermont. And we might not win in terms of getting any money from Entergy on this. And my question for the panel is, if the state of Vermont thinks this is important, will you fund it?
Yeah, page. Can you say fund what?
Will you fund adequate emergency planning in the absence of money towards that from Entergy?
All right, so I'll answer this way. We believe Entergy should be responsible for funding adequate emergency management associated with the fact that they still have fuel that is not as secure as it could be, all right? I'll say it that way. And my department will pursue every opportunity we can to make sure that they do that they take responsibility for the emergency management necessary to respond to the fuel that is on site as it exists on site, be it in the pool and ultimately be it in dry cask storage. So I guess the answer to your question, I daringly say, is yes. We will do that, and we'll make sure that we do that in some fashion. We're going to pursue every opportunity that we can with NRC and with Entergy in a cooperative way, but I fully expect legislative action in the event that that doesn't occur, and we'll see where that goes.
Is this working?
Yes.
Great. Okay. Deb Cask. I live in Rome, Massachusetts. I'm with the Citizens Awareness Network. So I want to first suggest a couple of things to the panel to look at, because in 2005, the National Academy of Sciences came out with a long report on the vulnerability of nuclear reactor fuel pools to terrorism as well as accidents. And the reactors on the top of the list were boiling water reactors. In fact, their sense of vulnerability was so great that they refused to show the diagrams for the BWRs during the hearings that they held. And the National Academy of Sciences is a well-respected outfit in America at this point. It would also be good to think about the fact that it's not just in terms of terrorism. There have been reactors that have lost water in their fuel pools, in which there's literally the water was starting to drain out of the pool, and because they had to get water to the pool, they had to drag hoses up, in some cases 7 flights of stairs. So there are things that can happen with fuel pools, and at reactors where there are less workers, less maintenance going on, there is also the potential for more vulnerability in terms of that. So that is just something to think of, and it would be reasonable to, in fact, investigate through the NRC problems that have occurred at operating reactors throughout the country in terms of fuel pool vulnerabilities, because there's a lot of information on it, and it would help for the panel to get all sides on this, including just the technical information that comes from the NRC. I would also suggest, because we were involved in the decommissioning of Connecticut Yankee as well as the decommissioning of Yankee Row, we sued the NRC over both of those decommissionings, but the decommissioning at Row is similar to Connecticut Yankee. It started at about $265 million and wound up at over $700 million, and it was because of the level of contamination on the site, in which, in part, tritium contamination went down 300 feet into the ground. And they have had to not release that site for unrestricted use for a very long time because of it. But in that case, with Roe, it was not a merchant plant. And so, in fact, the ratepayers of Massachusetts basically covered the cost for the cleanup of that site. So that is also something to think of in terms of what Vermont is up against in terms of the cleanup. And I want to thank the state of Vermont for the work they're doing to try to hold the NRC as well as Entergy accountable for the mess that is Vermont Yankee at this point. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Leslie Sullivan Sachs. I live in Brattleboro with the Safe and Green campaign. I have two comments. Well, first, thank you very much, Department of Health, and for your presentations and for the work you're doing to protect our health. I agree with Dr. Irwin that that this should not be looked at through the lens of dose alone. And one reason for that is that right now the EPA is considering changing the protective action guidelines so that the dose that we would all be allowed to receive from radiation would be higher than it currently is. The NRC is also currently considering changing its regulations such that in the case of an accident, the dose that we would be receiving could be higher than the current law allows. These things could happen to us, and these changes could be made at any time over the next 59 and a half years. The second thing I'd like to say is that I believe that this issue, the whole decommissioning of Vermont Yankee and the corporate versus state versus public, the whole 9 yards, ball of wax, is one of the most important issues that is going to face the state of Vermont during our lifetimes. And that the fact that we are meeting, that you as a panel are meeting for 3 hours every other month to talk about what should be one of the top priorities of the state really upsets me. I mean, yeah, we're way behind on this agenda, but the information that was given to you this evening should have been given to you months ago so that the panelists could have advised both the state and Entergy upon it. And I can't hold back my feeling of disappointment that this important issue only deserves 3 hours every 60 days.
Good evening. Working. Howard Schaefer, Enfield, New Hampshire, startup engineer at Yankee, now retired and still with the American Nuclear Society. I'm glad that the previous speaker raised the issue of radiation standards because a great deal of work going on now to incorporate the science not only of radiation, but also the medical science, what causes cancer. It's been developed over the last 50 years, which is what the current regulations and numbers are based on. And the current experience shows that the lowest levels of radiation have no effect at all, and at a level above that, like everything else in nature, you get a vaccination effect. Then if you get a higher level, you get into dangerous areas just as you do with all kinds of chemicals. Second point, since I came here when it was true in 1972, and there was no FEMA, the plant was not built and there was no emergency plan required because, as we heard at a VSNAP meeting last year, the year before, I guess, emergency plans did not begin to be required until 1979. So the question I would ask the state would be, what emergency plan would Brattleboro and Vernon have had and have now had the plant never been built, for notifying people, for evacuating people, for dealing with all kinds of accidents like floods, snowstorms, ice blocks of the river, railroad accidents, and so forth. And of course, those will exist after the plant is gone or as it goes on, and they're not zero, they're substantial. And third of all, having in my career been involved in emergency plans in 4 different plants, in 4 different roles, and in developing scenarios, I would suggest that before the panel conclude that the scenario that was drilled in May is really likely, they get a full report on what the scenario was, including a timeline and all the things that had to be in the scenario in order to get people to the fuel to set it on fire, such as how many armed people attacked the plant, how many guards were killed, how many doors were blown up, and so forth, before you decide whether it's a realistic scenario. Thank you.
Now, can you make it short?
Yeah, I'll try to be pretty short. I've got a bunch to say, but I'll hold it back. I just want you to know that Howard Schaefer, nuclear engineers' considered opinion that there is a safe threshold of radiation is debunked. You shouldn't believe that in the fact that they're not looking for radiation, and they're not monitoring. They've shut down a lot of the monitoring stations. They're not looking for radiation offshore the Pacific coast. I should tell you that they don't want to find it because the International Commission on Radiation Protection has long decided and ruled that there is no safe exposure. And the whole idea of protection action guidelines was to midwife an industry that was never needed. And it's based on a bunch of hooey. And Chris, keep going. This isn't safe. And I wanted to briefly say to Joe Lynch that he's wrong on a couple of counts. First, it's not SAFSTOR. There's nothing safe about the long-lived radiological toxins, even though Howard wants to have them for a vaccine. They're not safe, and so there's no E in that plan. It's SAFSTOR. The idea that it's safe, and don't put the E in there just specifically because it's not safe. So why don't you start calling it SAFSTOR? And you said there's no pathway for release of the radiation now that it's not operating, because you fully know they vent through the smokestack in operating reactors, and when they open the pressure vessel to change fuel in operating reactors, there is a big release because it's under pressure, the krypton, the radioactive iodine, and there is a big release, and they've been shown in Germany, now that the Greens got into power in Bavaria, that every time they open up a reactor, and presumably when they're doing this spent fuel transferring, there's a release, but not as much as when they're opening an operating reactor. But a release pathway is in the groundwater. We all know there's groundwater contamination in Vermont Yankee. We have no reason to believe the tritium isn't 300 feet in the ground as it was at Roe Yankee. And so the pathway for release is in the groundwater. And maybe you don't realize that, but go back to school.
We're going to give, wait a minute.
Have time for a very short.
If you can make it really, really quick.
Okay, Peter
Really
Rios, I'm with New England Coalition. In 2010 or thereabouts, we had a cask drop accident on the edge of the fuel pool here at Vermont Yankee. That cask, they weigh approximately 100 tons. It could have fallen into the fuel pool and caused a LOCA, loss of cooling accident, by breaking through the bottom of the fuel pool. Now, we were very lucky because it only fell 4 inches, but nonetheless, the crane was not tested beforehand. And anyway, that type of accident could have been just as serious as a meltdown. And so I have to wonder why the emergency management team will no longer be funded as of next year.
I'm going to let Joe just go really quickly, just to maybe clarify a couple of things. Then we're going to move on to the advisory opinion. But I wanted the public to remember that there is an email that you can send comments to, and that's PSD, as in Public Service Department, .ndcap@vermont.gov.
Just a couple of quick comments. As far as using the terminology SAFSTOR or SAFSTOR, I didn't make that up. That's an NRC terminology. It's well accepted within the industry, and we'll continue to use it as long as the NRC does. And second, as far as pathways, we are certainly continuing to monitor everything on site, and I think the data will show that groundwater tritium continues to decline. The sources of any sort of leaks at the site are being eliminated daily, and that is our goal for water management. So all of these risks continue to decline as we go forward. And in regards to the issue with the crane, that's well documented, had been talked about in the past, and the event has been completely analyzed, and we understood what happened, and it's been fixed, so we would not expect anything like that again in the future.
Thank you, everybody. We're going to move on now to our discussion on the advisory opinion process. At the last meeting, we had the discussion about whether this panel should give advice. And it was, I think, universally agreed upon that we have the word advisory in our name, so perhaps we should advise. I'm going to give a brief sort of run through about what our committee talked about. It was a committee that was formed. If anybody on the committee thinks I got it wrong, please wave your hand, because it was very going back and forth a while, but I think I got it right now. So what I'm going to do is we'll do it in two segments. We'll talk about the process, and we'll talk about some of the issues that we thought we should address sooner rather than later. The process that we talked about was if somebody here, the member of the panel, wanted to introduce a topic, they would bring it up at a meeting. We would vote on it whether or not that topic should move forward. It would be a majority vote of the panel to move the topic forward. Before I go too far, I want to explain how the majority vote would be calculated, and for lack of a better word. You can vote yes, no, or abstain. Abstain is not counted. So if there were 9 people who voted either yes or no and 10 people who abstained, it would be the 9 votes that we would be dealing with. So you would either have to have 5 people vote yes to move it forward, or if 5 people voted no, it would not move forward. So abstain, basically, it doesn't count, and they're not calculated in the votes. So if a topic is going to move forward, it needs to get the majority of the people who vote yes or no, if that makes sense to everybody. Once the topic is moved forward, someone, whether it's hopefully somebody on the panel, has to volunteer to actually write an opinion on that topic. In order to give the panelists and the public enough time to understand what that opinion is, the opinion needs to be submitted to the chair of the panel 4 weeks prior to the next meeting. Once that opinion is submitted, it's going to go on the Public Service Department website and be circulated to the other members of the panel, which will allow the members of the panel to see it, which will also allow the public to see it. If anybody sees that opinion and would like to write one that's different for some reason than the one that has been originally submitted, anybody can do that. That one needs to be submitted 1 week before the panel meeting. And at that point, it will be circulated to the panel and it will be circulated to the public. So we have the process is in 2 steps. The original opinion, and then 1 or more. It doesn't have to be 5 people can write a second opinion if they want. What will happen after that? We'll get public comment. We'll talk about it at what we hope would be the next meeting, because obviously, if there's a topic, we don't want to take it up at one meeting, and 6 months later we're still talking about it. So the goal would be, it would be introduced at one meeting. If it moved forward, it would be the next scheduled NDCAP meeting where we vote on it, unless people don't feel that they have enough information to make a decision. If it's a topic that we've never discussed before and people just can't, in that short period of time, make a decision, we would schedule it for the next meeting where we all felt comfortable. But we want to do it as sooner rather than later. What would happen at the meeting where we vote on it is that opinion would have to receive a majority of the votes of the people who didn't abstain, which is what I hopefully just explained. If it passed or if it didn't pass, obviously if it doesn't pass, it's not the opinion of the panel. If it passes, it becomes the opinion of the panel. The caveat to this is everyone's vote would be listed on the opinion. So if you voted no or you abstained, it would not appear to everybody out in the world that you had voted yes on this, because we don't want to say it's the opinion of the panel if only 5 people supported it, and there are 19 of us. So what we hope to do was do this. It sounds, I'm hoping it's not as complicated as I'm making it sound. And it could be for the people who weren't involved in the discussion on this. But the goal of it is to allow us to advise, allow the process to have public input, and allow the process to move forward quickly enough so we're not dragging our heels on something that is timely. And I don't know if I made, did that make sense?
Yes.
Oh, Pat has a question.
For the purposes of majority, it would not be the majority of the people present at the meeting, or would it? Or would it be the majority of the 19 members? So if you weren't at a meeting, you'd still have a chance to vote one way or the other? That's a question mark.
Somebody can correct me on the panel if I'm wrong. Obviously it's the people here that vote. And we hadn't talked about doing a web vote, but we could. You know, I mean, we have it in our charter that we can conduct business online. So that is an option, which we hadn't really talked about, but it's an option that we can do. And it still allows people to vote yes, no, or abstain.
Can I just add one point about the alternative opinion process? So if, the first draft is circulated after 4 weeks, somebody really disagrees with it or disagrees with it a little bit, drafts an alternative opinion, which is then also circulated. That alternative opinion could turn out to be the one that gets the majority vote. First of all, this is just sort of like the Supreme Court, although we're trying not to draw too lofty comparisons. But the alternative could turn out to be the majority opinion. But as long as there were at least 2 people who supported an opinion, an alternative opinion, that would be appended to whatever we issue. So we would issue recommendation A, sort of disagreeing recommendation B, signed by at least 2 people, and so forth. It could be 3 or 4 of them.
There's one issue here, and I don't know how to deal with it. I'm not liable to bond on after the fact. It's just, I think the process as laid out makes sense. But one of the things I brought up last time, and I just don't know how to address it, is I imagine the way this would work, 5 of the people who would be voting are people who I assume we would be advising. I mean, I love you guys, you guys are great. But to some extent, those who are being advised are also voting on what the citizens advisory panel is. So anyway, I don't know how we reconcile that. It may never even be an issue, but it's just an awkward circumstance for those being advised are also being voted on what they're being advised.
Well, that's where we had the whole discussion about being able to abstain. But it could come down to the fact that there may be only 5 or 6 people that ever vote on these things. I think it's sort of the point, what you're saying. It could be coming a vote of 6 to 13 people abstain and 6 people vote. Yes.
I hear you, Chris, but I think that assumes every advisory opinion is going to be directed at the state, and I'm not sure that's going to be the case in all cases. I mean, I look at Nuclear Regulatory Commission closure rules. There isn't a whole lot, God bless you, Chris Recchio, that you can do about that. I would assume that would be an opinion we would direct to the NRC. So,
I'm just thinking of our mission.
No,
what the legislature, if you look at what we're specifically tasked with, we primarily establish and advise the governor, the legislator, the state agency. And you guys are both representing agencies and you're the governor's appointees. So I'm not trying to create trouble. I'm just saying it's a awkward circumstance I don't know how to deal with it. But yeah, that is, I mean, clearly, advising the NRC is probably the easiest thing that this whole panel could do.
I understand, Tony, is Jim on the phone?
Yes.
Does he want to say, offer an opinion on the opinion?
Jim, are you there?
Aware that Chris Campany was talking, but not what he was saying. Anyway, my only point, I assume we're going to take a vote as to whether or not to accept this review process and the three recommended issues. On the process itself, the first point is, I think 4 weeks each, 3 weeks, because there's a monthly meeting. If you vote on an issue and you want the person to draft an opinion, get it 4 weeks ahead, you're going to have to go before they go home. I think we need that reason.
I think what, so what he's saying is that my phone is off. Oh, is that phone? Okay. I think what he's saying is that, like, if it's an instance where we're having a monthly meeting, that would be 4 weeks away. So in reality, it would be 3 weeks. So that's, I think, now.
Basically, we have to work on the timing. This is a work in progress because we haven't tested it. So this could work or it could be a total nightmare when we have to do it again.
I think when we came up with these, we were still working on the premise of every other month, so we thought that that would give plenty of time.
Hold on, Jim, we got to get you back to the speaker.
Okay, we're ready.
Am I on? If this is a work in progress, the panel's been a work in progress for a long time. And I really was of the opinion that we were gonna make a decision on this tonight. Maybe I was wrong, but I also remember a very clear discussion in the committee that we were gonna go with 3 weeks. Even that we had that meeting monthly at times, and I've been on the record saying I think we haven't been tougher, so I pushed for more. And if this is going to be a work in progress for a long time, and then we're going to have only meetings every other month, I think that raises something there.
I only meant work in progress, that I thought at the committee level, we thought we'd try it and see if we had to, if we had to make changes, we would. And I think, Jim, the whole 4-week, 3-week thing, I don't want to throw Chris under the bus, but Chris Campney and I had a discussion about it. If you have to put your opinion in 4 weeks before a meeting, it gives people more time. If you're putting it in 3 weeks before a meeting, it gets people less time to look at it. I don't know if that makes sense.
I think he's talking about meeting frequency.
Oh, okay.
He's making the case. Jim, I don't know if you can hear me or not, but I think I heard Jim say, my phone is off. I think I heard Jim say that another one of his assumptions was we should be meeting more frequently, hence the 3-week record.
Okay, I gotcha.
Okay, this seems really dangerous, but I'll weigh in here. So I'm thinking that you guys have put some work into this and thought into it in terms of how to proceed with recommendations. And I would suggest we adopt it and then see how it works. And then we can change it if we don't like it.
Second.
Yeah, consider that a motion.
Okay, can you talk a little bit about, because it's not on the sheet, about what the process would be for abstaining? What's the criteria? Is it strictly voluntary? Is it potential conflicts of interest? What's the ground there?
You can abstain if you feel there's a reason for you to. Yeah, it's totally voluntary. So, I mean, we could get in a situation where 13 people abstain and 6 people vote. So, if you feel you need to abstain, you can abstain.
We had no criteria.
There's nothing.
Just to use maybe one specific case as an example, I have a similar question. I agree, number one, that we should see if it flies, test it out, see how it goes. But to use the second one listed on the bottom of your page, which is the CPG process for the ISPC. So there's 6 or 7 of us at this table right now that have some formal role in that process. Sorry, have some formal role in that process. So it'd be interesting to get around their head nods. Do we think that those folks would have to abstain from a recommendation on that? Or do you think we could somehow make a recommendation and then also play our roles in that proceeding?
So truthfully, I, for one, if it was during the process, I would abstain from that.
Okay.
And I think the point where of having people be able to list what their votes are on the bottom of it is really, we don't want anyone to feel shamed, like I don't, or anybody to, there's no judgment in whether you abstain or not. And I think that's the point, because I don't think we want to hold people feeling like no one has a judgment upon you whether you abstain. If that makes sense.
Oh, maybe to clarify, I would abstain from the vote. I would not abstain from the discussion. Let people.
Yeah, Chris regularly made a motion that we accept the process as is and then test it. Oh, everybody wants to second. So is everybody, does everyone want to take a vote?
I'll go.
Okay. All in favor of the motion to do what Chris said?
Aye.
Anybody against it? Anybody abstaining? Yeah, and Jim is voting yes. Okay, so the plan, just to recap for everybody, is the memo that everyone has that lists the process is a process we're going to go with and see how it goes, and then we can make it better if we need to. Okay, now I'm just going to move quickly on to the topics. What we did was, as we had talked about at the last meeting, was maybe there's some topics that we can start with. And the intent, we don't have to do these topics. These are just the ones that the committee talked about, which would be the Nuclear Regulatory Commission closure rules, the CPG process on the second ISPC, and the Vermont Department of Health groundwater monitoring through license termination. Obviously, those are just topics. They're not what the opinion would be. So in our process, what we would do is either, vote, yes, we want to take up the CPG process. And if we did, somebody would have to go forward and say, I'm going to write an opinion on that. Does that make sense to everybody? So the discussion we want to have right now is what would the issues be if we wanted to move forward now and see how it goes and what's important and what's timely.
So,
You want to vote now on
Madam Chairman, just to clarify, because I'm so sensitive to this, if I say I think we should do this, am I volunteering to do it?
Not necessarily, but that doesn't mean 18 people aren't going to look at you.
Yeah.
So I mean, that's a loose end, is that somebody has to volunteer to step forward to write these things. And as much as I like being the chair of this thing, writing all of this stuff gets in the way of my ability to do stuff. So we're going to have other people do stuff.
And, I will volunteer my department to help where possible, but I will say that I think probably the most fruitful area for this committee, because I think the Nuclear Regulatory Commission is paying attention community and citizen advice now, I would say the most fruitful venue is for this group to comment on decommissioning before the NRC, and I would encourage us to do that in whatever forum we're able to do that.
I'd just like to add also that, you know, in the committee, we said this does not have to be a 17-page white paper with footnotes, okay? You know, because then nobody's going to read it and it'll sit on the shelf and that's it. So, you know, a one-pager would be beautiful, a two-pager if it has to be. Let's not make these things be master's theses.
You're bringing up questions, and two questions here is, if it seems plausible here that there could be obviously 2 or 3 position papers on a given topic being submitted. Does it seem plausible that those positions are written, are distributed at a NDCAP meeting, they're discussed, and then they don't necessarily all have to be voted on, that an author of one of them could decide as part of that discussion to withdraw it, and therefore it wouldn't be voted? That's question 1. Question 2 is I would imagine that the writing of some of these position papers won't be one person in the closet with one line of typewriter, but it could be a collaborative effort. And what steps need to be taken to make sure that we're not having any open meeting law violations by members of the group meeting off to the side?
I'll do the open meeting law first. As long as there isn't a majority of the board meeting or panel meeting at the same time, which would be 10. So if 10 of us were in a room at the same time, we'd be violating open meeting law. If 9 of us are in the room at the same time, we wouldn't. We hadn't addressed whether somebody wanted to pull their opinion, but there would be nothing wrong with it. And that's not to say somebody wouldn't say, oh, I'll take it up. But if you don't want it under your name anymore, I don't think we'd force them to. That's right. That's right.
Yeah, I think one may turn out to be a better argument than the other, and in that case, I can see one being withdrawn, for instance. So, yeah, I think we should allow for that. Yeah.
I'll apologize, but I admit I'm a little confused. You have 3 ideas on the table, and Chris, the idea you just put forth is different than these 3, yes?
Of course.
Okay, okay. And are we sort of brainstorming right now on potential ideas, or did you want to actually get into a dialogue about any of these 3 ideas? Okay, we're brainstorming.
Here.
What we would, this is what sort of like the committee ideally would love, is if we could pick at least one topic tonight that we could move forward for November. So it's sort of a, and then we would have a bigger discussion, obviously, about that topic after the opinion was formed at the next meeting.
And Chris, you're saying that the decommissioning question is timely, and hence the desire to get maybe that issue moving forward. Am I understanding that correctly?
Yes.
Thank you.
And Chris has offered to have someone help us write it, so.
He's going into a room with a typewriter.
Yes.
So.
Tony?
And I've already on the NRC policy-making process, I've actually already written a 1-page, which basically asks the NRC to convene, to actively seek and the opinions of and convene host communities in their policy-making process. Because right now, we had a really, Senator Leahy arranged for a conversation. It was a really interesting conversation because they were like, well, there'll be plenty of public meetings and public hearings where you can give your input, but I've been involved in the federal rulemaking process. I used to know once the rule has been in the Federal Register, you're about a dozen steps behind it. We need to be involved up front. And so I can volunteer to go ahead and share that with folks. And folks, massage it or do whatever they want with it, but they may already have something somewhat in the can.
So is the, right now, are we feeling comfortable, and we'll take a vote on this, according to our rules, we do it, we take a vote on it. Is everyone comfortable with the topic being the NRC and decommissioning? Or you want to be more
Being
specific?
involved in the policy-making
Right, process. Public participation, or host community participation in the NRC decommissioning process. Did that hit it on the head, Chris?
So that's your issue, the host community.
Yes, I mean, I think, you know, being involved in the decommissioning process could be huge, but I think that the idea of, look, you are unique, NDCAP is a unique citizen advisory panel that the NRC wants to pay attention to. So I think that it's really important to narrow it to your participation in the decommissioning process. And I'm not sure whether this thing is one issue within that process or whether you want to do all within the process. You might want to take one issue.
Yeah, but we just 1 second.
Hi, Jim Mattel. So you might want to say, for now, that you are engaging in a discussion of the decommissioning process with respect to expenditures from the NDT, or thanks, Jim. And then you reserve the right to do everything after that. But I think identifying an issue right now might make the most sense, or EPZ, or whatever it is.
Jim.
Yeah.
Okay, we're ready for you.
Okay, sorry for that. The sound is actually, if it was broke a lot, it might get horrible, but it's been pretty difficult. If I understand correctly, we're talking about picking one thing to do a different opinion. David Dean had to get off to go to another meeting, and he asked me to mention to him that he was supporting looking at all three, and I certainly with that as well. There are 19 people on the panel. I don't see why we would have to take one of the three issues and maybe spend months dealing with that. So I would want to do all three. Second, if we're going to do one, the Nuclear Regulatory Commission is probably less interested than most people in the world on anyone's advice. I would not make that a priority. I think the Entergy is a much more pressing issue for Vermont. And so might be the third item on groundwater monitoring. If we can't do all three, I really would want to speak against it, not just likely listen.
So, is that a motion to approve all three?
Second.
I guess I'm adding a fourth or maybe fifth issue, which would be weighing in some way, and no, I'm not volunteering to write because I'm not an expert on this, but weighing in some way to the whole safety planning and funding discussion that we've had tonight would seem as though that would be an appropriate thing. Now, that could come under the community involvement in decommissioning process topic, but it seems like that's a fairly important topic that we may want to advise on.
Okay, what does everybody want? We've got numerous proposals now. We have do one, we have do three, we haven't had any of fourth, so.
Just to,
I'm not advancing that fourth or fifth idea tonight, as much as getting it on the list for future discussion.
If any of these get voted to have an opinion developed for them, and then nobody steps forward, basically that means that issue dies for the time being. So I kind of agree with Jim. We have enough people. We may not have somebody step forward on each of these issues right now, but Kate and I can twist a few arms and see if we can get something going. So I'm going to make a motion that we take all 4 of those issues, that includes the one that Pat just mentioned, and see if we can develop opinions on those for the next meeting.
So I'll just, now we have a comment related to that. Okay, so I'll just say, I think it's good to just move these things forward, but I was going to say, I think we need more detail on all of them. And I'm happy to participate in any way that is helpful, but we're going to have major discussions on each of these before we actually move them forward. I think you all understand that. That's good.
And it may take more than a meeting.
Yes, unfortunately, it may take
Is everybody clear now on what these issues are?
The last one that was discussed, that I believe you said safety funding. Do you mean emergency response funding or monitoring the environment funding, or what do you mean by safety funding?
All of the above, essentially, is
Okay, I didn't realize the topic was discussing safety funding.
So just to
I'm not even sure what that is.
the continuation of the
The
yes, the
All right, so that would be
yes.
emergency response funding
Thank you,
and
thank you.
not safety funding. I think.
Sorry.
I'm sure it was safety funding.
Wrong terminology.
Thank you.
But yes, it's the RERP discussion.
Okay, I'm going to go through these, and you guys can tell me if I have it wrong. We're going to do something to the NRC. I don't know what it is. It may be the engagement in the process, public engagement in the process, but it's going to be, I don't know, we didn't really settle on what it was, but some kind of advice to the NRC about the decommissioning process and how we're experiencing it here in the state of Vermont. Second one is the certificate of public good process on the second pad. The third is the Vermont Department of Health and Groundwater monitoring through license termination. And the fourth is the funding for the continuation of the RERP. Does that sound like what we just all talked about? Continuation of the emergency plan that we talked about tonight. So, everybody in agreement on that? Okay, now we have to take, according to the process that we just adopted, we have to take a vote on whether we want to move these things forward. So all in favor of moving everything forward? Aye. Any opposed? Anyone abstaining? And what's Jim want to do?
I'm getting an aye from Jim.
Okay.
I haven't heard anything from Diane.
Okay.
Diane says aye as well.
Great. So our first attempt at this, we have 4 topics that we're going to move forward. The plan now is for 1 or more people to volunteer to write these. They will go on the Public Service Department website. 4 weeks. We have to figure this one out because the meeting is now November 12th, but we'll publish the dates. We'll figure out the dates and I'll let everybody know what it is. And then hopefully at the next meeting, we will have a discussion on 1 or more of these. Does that sound good to everybody?
We'll break the ice. We'll take number 3, groundwater monitoring. Hey. Really?
Okay. We have a volunteer. Okay. Okay, we got 1 and we got... Great. And obviously, once people see what these opinions are, you can write another one. So we're not, nobody has to get panicked here. Great. There- is the panel all set on that? Do we feel comfortable? Sort of? I think we do. Now we're going to just move on to public comment, and I don't know if anyone in the public, what I would ask too is short and concise, and remember that we now have a means to email us. No, that's.
That have to emerge, can that emerge over time?
It can emerge over time. So if you go home tonight, you wake up in the morning all excited about writing something, you just let me know.
Guy Page, I'm the Gold Star child. I've been to every NDCAP meeting there is. And so I have a sense of ownership. And when this all started, the discussion of it, I remember Amy back saying, hey, they're thinking about doing this. And I thought, great. And this was sold to the legislature as an opportunity for interested people to come together, to speak, listen, consider, do some research, be a clearinghouse. I don't remember citizens advocacy panel. It's advisory, not advocacy. And I'm really concerned that this will be turning this into essentially a mini legislature, an advocacy group. And it's a wonderful thing to express positions and opinions. The problem with that is inevitably the minority is marginalized and is silenced. And I realize there's a way for the minority to have their say, but the net effect is rather than being equals and colleagues coming together to discuss, you're going to have advocacy pushing. And I just don't think that's the way that really this needs to go. You have a really unique mission here, the way I have always understood it anyway. And it seems to me that there's plenty of advocacy groups. We already have a legislature. We don't have one of these. And I'm really concerned that that there's some mission creep going on here. So that's all. Thank you.
Does anyone else in the public?
Since I was involved, I'll comment. Amy Schollenberger, I live in Barry. I'm also a lobbyist for Citizens Awareness Network, and I think it actually is in your mission. The law specifically states that you can give advice to the state and to the legislature, and I would strongly encourage you to go forward with your plan.
I don't think I gave my name in town earlier. It's Ned Childs, Dummerston, with the New England Coalition on Nuclear Pollution. And just follow up to Joe, who came back to my question. He stated the risks of the groundwater contamination continue to decline with lower levels of contamination being monitored on the site. And I would seek to reassure you that, in fact, at least over the short term, and within a half-life or so of tritium and the longer half-life, as you know, for strontium and cesium, the risk does not decline, it simply is moved somewhere else. That radioactive atoms that cause cancer and birth defects and gene mutations move off the site, and they're into the river, and where people are rowing downstream, they use the Connecticut River for a lot of rowing regattas, and people splash in that water. So the risk is simply moving. And if you were to back pump those contaminated sites and hurry up with the decommissioning, which doesn't seem like is in anybody's interest, especially Entergy, they're not, and all the vendors, they're not trying to establish the precedent that these things can be cleaned up. When Carol pointed out to me, Carol Levin, also of the NEC, that it was 7 years at Maine and 8 years in Connecticut. There's no reason to wait 70 years except to avoid establishing the precedent that nuclear plants can and ought to be decommissioned quickly and not take forever and save that money. So those are my thoughts, and I'll have more for you down the road. Thank you.
Anyone else in the public that wants to make a comment? Great. Now, is there anyone in the panel or otherwise that wants to make one last comment before we go?
So I just want to make a couple of comments to kind of close the discussion on emergency planning. And Chris mentioned a few things about scenarios and how they're developed to ensure that all of the various agencies are tested. And that's exactly what they are. One of the other things that's very important to understand is that our security force is part of a detailed security plan with the NRC. They go through what is known as a force-on-force exercise. The NRC actually brings in trained adversaries, and our security force in real time are taxed and tested to see whether or not the NRC's security people can break through our defenses and get into the various areas of our site. Obviously, we use simulated gunfire and things like that, but we have successfully completed all of our force-on-force exercises over the years, demonstrating that our security force is second to none when it comes to nuclear safety, which is the very first barrier to starting a hostile action-based event. So I just wanted to make sure people are aware that we are also exercised in an area having to do with our security force. The last comment I'd like to make goes back to a comment that Commissioner Recchia made regarding the agreement that we have with New Hampshire. I take exception to that comment about a stick in the eye. The state of New Hampshire approached Entergy on a long-term emergency planning deal. We did not approach them. We worked with them in good faith, and we negotiated something that I think they appreciate greatly. I just came to realize that Diane Becker is on the call, and she may have a comment or two to make on that, because I attended a meeting last week in New Hampshire where I provided an overview of decommissioning, and she made that very statement to the New Hampshire Emergency Planning Zone during their quarterly meeting.
I reiterate that New Hampshire has other nuclear power plants that enable them to support their emergency management support. You do not want me to get into, and I will not, the discussions we've had with Entergy on this subject. The fact of the matter is they've been non-productive and going in the wrong direction.
I just want to make one quick comment. There's been, Winter Regional Commission has been in the news for our filing of testimony about our concerns about VY's assumption about when the Department of Energy might pick up the spent fuel. I just want to read why we're concerned about that briefly, because it seems to be getting muddled. This is Entergy's own language from page 23 of the site area assessment, site assessment study. At the time of decontamination and dismantlement are scheduled to start, NV, Nuclear Vermont Yankee, assumes all spent fuel will have been removed from the site and therefore will not affect the decommissioning activities. If DOE's removal of spent fuel is delayed beyond the assumed completion date, or the decontamination and dismantlement activities are accelerated and start before the removal of the fuel, the presence of the fuel may inhibit demolition or restrict the methodologies available for demolishing the reactor building and or structures adjacent to the stored spent fuel. So what our concern is that if their pickup assumptions are incorrect, it could delay decommissioning and or increase the costs because of where they're proposing to put this spent fuel pad, the new one, which would be adjacent to the old one. And in prior dockets, this issue about proximity of the pads to the two things that need to be decommissioned could delay things. It's really just that simple. And so what we have asked the Public Service Board to consider is whether or not other alternatives should be explored, even though that may take more time and cost more money. Or conversely, if their pickup assumptions are incorrect, should they be held accountable? Should Entergy, without further burdening the decommissioning trust, be held responsible for that incorrect assumption so that decommissioning is not further delayed. Some folk may not care about this because we're talking about decades into the future. But as a regional planning commission, our concern is that we don't want to make a decision. We at least need to bring up the issue today that can burden that future generation ultimately is responsible for decommissioning the plant, dealing with the spent fuel, and dealing with the trust. So I just wanted to lay that out there, and that we have not suggested that the spent fuel be taken someplace else other than the site. What we're asking is have all site alternatives of storing fuel on the site been appropriately evaluated. And this is not a new issue. It goes back to, I believe, 2006. This is nothing new. And actually, we expressed this opinion more than a year ago in a file movement last August. So I just wanted to make that clear. I've got copies of our pre-file testimony here in case folks want it. It's also available on our website. But I just wanted to make that clear about what our concern was. And I've got other information. If you go back and look at Public Service Department's comments, they've raised the same issues. We're basically reiterating what Entergy itself has said about their own approach. That's it.
Anyone else on the panel?
Diane Becker does want to speak.
Oh, good.
I don't know if we can get her. But Diane, if you can hear me, can you just say something right now to your computer? I want to see if I can hear you here.
I don't know if you can hear me.
Yeah, I can hear you. Hold on. I don't know how this is going to work.
Okay.
Go ahead, Diane.
Okay. I apologize for not being able to be there this evening. I've been fighting a cold, and I did see Joe today. I just couldn't make it up to Brattleboro. With all due respect to the panel, and certainly Mr. Recchia, I too took a little bit of an exception to the fact that the agreement, the settlement agreement that the state of New Hampshire reached with Entergy was based upon any kind of ill will or wanting to stick it in the eye of the state of Vermont. That certainly was not the intention. And very much like you, I think we in the state of New Hampshire, although we do have Seabrook Station, that is true, the loss of funding from Entergy represents close to $3 million for our state, and that's money that goes to state agencies, just as they do in Vermont for exercises and all that. But when you take the 1.5 million or thereabouts that we got and leverage that against the money that we received from the federal government that we use the Entergy money as a match, it becomes quite substantial. I think our concern, however, continues to be the transition of some of our agencies, ours being one, and those communities within the EPZ who have counted upon Entergy and Vermont Yankee, in essence, for funding them all these years. And I dare say that it is similar to the towns in Massachusetts and Vermont that that money went into the coffers of the emergency planning in those communities, but it was not strictly dedicated for rep activities. And so in fact, what Entergy had done all along was to fund the all hazards approach to those communities out there. And I certainly agree with Erica that because of that kind of funding and that kind of support from a nuclear power plant, those communities are probably better prepared than most of the other communities in the state. Having said that, I think meeting with Entergy and talking to them about transitioning those towns and assisting with those towns with the transition from a rep-funded all-hazard plan to another all-hazard plan funded by other sources is a difficult thing for many of those communities because, as we know, they're very small communities and they relied upon the money from Entergy quite a bit. We felt a little bit differently than Vermont, true, about the risks, and we felt more comfortable that we did not feel the high level of anxiety over the potential of any kind of event. And so we felt it most appropriate to put our efforts in trying to engage Entergy in a discussion about transition with those communities. And I must say that they have been more than willing to sit down and talk, and as a result, ended up obviously with funding over the next 5 years that will help those communities become more reliant on other sources. And that's really why it was done. And as I said, I take exception to the fact that there was any ill will towards the state of Vermont considered in that approach. That's it.
Thank you, Diane. This is Chris. Hi. So, look, I'm going to be just crystal clear here. We have been in discussions with them regularly on this issue since this came up. And we had a proposal that we think was very fair, that was very, very far from what they are currently paying, recognizing that there's a reduced risk. I wish that, I appreciate New Hampshire's position, and, I understand that. Don't misunderstand that we have been in discussions and trying to make that work for us too. But recognize that we have one nuclear power plant and one issue here. And that was probably, if you will, easier for you to reach agreement based on your system and the multiple plants you have than it was for us. So I'm not disparaging Entergy or New Hampshire in this process. I'm just saying that we could not reach agreement based on where we were and what we felt was fair. And we're not trying to continue the current status by any stretch. We're at a fraction of that, but we were still not able to reach agreement on it.
And I certainly understand that, Chris, obviously, and I do wish out of all of the meetings, excuse me, that I was there this evening. And I absolutely understand that any of us, any of the states, have approaches, have their own concerns, their considerations. And I just want you to know that we certainly understand the approach that Vermont is taking, and we were not going to stand there and say Vermont's wrong or anything like that, and I think Entergy can speak to that. It was not pointed at Vermont in any way. So, as I said, we certainly understand the considerations that Vermont had to make. We understand that it's your own power plant. I just want you to understand that this was not meant in any way to disparage Vermont and your approach.
Thank you, Diane. 3 things before we go. The next meeting is going to be November 12th at the Vernon Elementary School. 2, you're going to get something that's a synopsis of this advisory opinion thing that we just decided on, so you won't be confused on what the process is and what topics we want. And I should have said this in the beginning, but I totally forgot. It was 1 year ago tomorrow that was our first meeting. So we've been doing this for a year, which is, yes, we can clap for ourselves. I would have brought a cake if I didn't realize it. So do we have a motion to adjourn? Take that as we're adjourning.
I think the second.
So we'll see everybody November 12th.